Hello, my name is Doug Cripe. I work for the Secretariat for the Group on Earth Observations, and I'd like to give you my presentation on Arctic to Global Perspectives. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the GEOGLAM, which stands for GEO Global Agricultural Monitoring Model for Food Security. In my presentation, I'm going to give you just a quick background about GEO itself, and then I will look at this idea of using GEOGLAM as a model for food security in the Arctic. So first off, when we talk about Earth observations, often people think of only remote sensing. They think of satellite imagery, but in actual fact, Earth observations are about gathering information from any platform that tells us about the physical, chemical, and biological systems that are in, on, and around the Earth. And why are we interested in Earth observations? Well, they are critical for what we call informed decision-making or evidence-based decision-making. And when faced with the kinds of environmental stresses and challenges that are current in the world today, it is, of course, essential to have the best information possible to make wise choices, because those choices do affect human well-being, the environment, and the economy. So in 2005, after a series of summits on Earth observations, the Group on Earth Observations was formed. And GEO is an intergovernmental partnership in which member governments can join on a best efforts basis to work together with our partners and towards improving the availability and the access, understanding, and use of Earth observations for the benefit of society. The vision of GEO is to realize a future where decisions and actions for the benefit of humankind are informed by coordinated, comprehensive, and sustained Earth observation information and services. So as I mentioned, member governments form the backbone of GEO. They are the decision-making body within GEO. Currently, we have 110 member governments represented here in blue. And where you see gray, that represents areas where we still have some gaps. So principally in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East. And what you don't see are small island states who are also largely lacking from our group of governments. GEO also comprises participating organizations. And although the participating organizations don't have a voice in the governance of GEO, they do influence the discussions within GEO. They have a voice in our plenary meetings, and they participate in our work program. The kinds of participating organizations that we have run the gamut from UN agencies such as the WMO, where the GEO Secretariat is actually hosted, to the World Health Organization, to UNCCD, UNESCO, IOC, and so forth. There are also a number of research organizations such as the OGC, the Open Geospatial Consortium. And then I have circled here in red your very own SEON, the Sustaining Arctic Observing Network, which is also a participating organization within GEO. So what does GEO do besides working towards opening up access to Earth observations? We work to develop and implement projects and initiatives that address global environmental challenges. And those initiatives, we call them either flagships at their fullest maturity with some kind of a policy mandate, or then they can be at the initiative level, which are perhaps not quite as mature. And then we have community activities, which are largely self-contained projects that contribute some aspect of applying Earth observations to societal challenges. So again, GEO is very much concerned with data sharing because the Group on Earth Observations believes that societal benefits arise when Earth observations are fully open and shareable. And not only the observations, but the information, the knowledge, the products, and the services that can be deduced from those Earth observations. And the influence of GEO can be felt in a number of ways. For example, back in 2007, the United States decided to open up access to its archive of Landsat imagery. So all Landsat images up to that point, up to 2007, had been available on a for sale basis. And as of that point, they were made fully and openly available for free. And this was announced at the GEO plenary meeting that was held in Cape Town in South Africa. And then more recently, the European Commission with the Copernicus project and the Sentinel satellites has also adopted an open and fully open and free access policy towards the data that comes from those satellites. So GEO is working to make this something that is kind of the default position, especially when it comes to publicly funded observation programs. GEO has a strategic plan that was developed at its renewal in 2016 for another 10 years. And part of that strategic plan is to produce the Global Earth Observation System of Systems, or GEOSS. So there's two acronyms to be aware of here. GEO is the group, the people, the group on Earth observations, or the coalition of governments, and GEOSS is the system of systems that will ultimately deliver global information as a basis for sound decision making. Again, as I mentioned, we're interested in Earth observations from a diverse variety of platforms, including satellite, airborne, in situ, and citizen observatories. And we're also looking at ways that these can be integrated together to provide tools for understanding the past and present conditions of Earth systems, as well as the interplay between them. Now, that will wrap up my introduction to GEO. Now I want to focus a little bit on the topic at hand, and that is how GEO can sustain and help what's happening across the Arctic in terms of observations. And as I mentioned, SEON is a participating organization within GEO, and they have put together an activity that's called Arctic GEOSS. So remember, GEOSS stands for the System of Systems, the Earth Observation System of Systems. And they've created a strategy for attaining this Arctic GEOSS, which includes a roadmap for a well-integrated Arctic observing system, and that's based on the Arctic Observations Assessment Framework, as well as these Arctic observing summits in which SEON is playing an important role, and then on products and services that are available through SEON and others. Secondly, this strategy for Arctic GEOSS is promoting free and ethically open access to all Arctic observational data. So this is right in line with one of the main GEO principles, and that is full and open access to data. The Arctic Data Committee is active in this particular area, working towards developing standards and system requirements and looking at issues of interoperability among the various observing platforms. And then finally, to ensure the sustainability of Arctic observing, there are a number of guidelines that have been drawn up to support SEON's roadmap for Arctic observing and data systems. And then also there is a work that's starting to be organized around identification of essential Arctic variables. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that later on. So to address some of the issues that the Arctic nations are facing, and in discussions I've had with some of the organizers of this summit, food security has come across as an issue of top concern. So the rest of this presentation is going to focus on GEOGLAM, again, the Global Agriculture Monitoring Initiative, and how the lessons learned in not only the development of GEOGLAM, but in the products that it produces might serve as an illustration for food security across the Arctic. GEOGLAM is working to fight insecurity in the food market, and it's using Earth observations to do that, to reinforce the international community's capacity to produce and disseminate relevant, timely, and accurate projections of agricultural production at national, regional, and global scales. The context for GEOGLAM is shown here in this chart, where on the y-axis you have dollars per metric ton, and across the, sorry, that's the y-axis, the x-axis shows years. And so from the 1960s up until 1972, thereabouts, monthly wheat prices in terms of dollars per metric ton were fairly stable. And then all of a sudden, from 1972 through even up until 2011, the volatility of monthly wheat, the monthly wheat index is very evident. In other words, it was a fairly, prices have been unstable since the early 70s. And this is due to a number of reasons, principally weather conditions, climate change. Also, there's a certain amount of infrastructure issues. But in any case, the point here is that due to a considerable increase in the volatility of wheat prices per metric ton, the agricultural ministers, the G20, decided that something needed to be done to try and bring some stability to this. The Geo-Agricultural Task was started in 2007, and then that morphed into the GEOGLAM flagship itself. So in 2011, under France's leadership, the G20 recognized the need for better information to support effective markets and to understand that Earth observations could contribute to market stability and even strengthen food security. Since 2011, GEOGLAM and its sister initiative on the statistical side, the Agricultural Market Information System, or AMIS, have been working towards bringing just that, food price stability in response to the volatile conditions that had existed prior to 2011. And both GEOGLAM and AMIS are being re-endorsed every year. Here was what the G20 final declaration stated with respect to GEOGLAM. They committed to improving market information and transparency to make international markets for agricultural commodities more effective. So AMIS was launched, and also the Global Agricultural Geomonitoring Initiative, GEOGLAM, was launched in 2011. And so this initiative, again, will coordinate satellite monitoring observation systems in different regions of the world in order to enhance crop production projections and weather forecasting data. And as I mentioned, in the subsequent meetings of the G20, both GEOGLAM and AMIS have enjoyed continued support for their ongoing activities. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is this is kind of one of the first main points that I want to make that I feel is important for the Arctic community. And that is, it's important to have ministerial support. It's important to have a mandate at the ministerial level so that countries or regions that participate in a particular activity related to Earth observations can then have the kind of the firepower they need to bring things about. GEO, as I mentioned, is a partnership. And so that means that the governments which participate in GEO are not bound by any decisions that are made within GEO. Each government comes with its national mandates and agrees in a non-binding way to work together towards whatever objective. But if you happen to have a ministerial mandate, then that makes your activity all the more, it brings gravitas to that activity and allows you to work further and faster. So now, what does GEOGLAM actually produce? What are its actual services? One of the main things that GEOGLAM produces are operational crop assessments. So one of the first activities of GEOGLAM was to direct a request from AMIS to provide timely and transparent monthly crop condition assessments for AMIS participating countries. And these countries comprise mainly either countries that are main producers of products, agricultural products, or export countries. But nevertheless, they wanted some kind of a crop assessment that would reflect an international consensus rather than one country or organization reporting on crop conditions globally. The idea is that each organization and agency contributes information and provides an international consensus on crop conditions. So the initial request from AMIS was for 4 major crops to be reported on, and that would be wheat, maize, soybeans, and rice. The output from this is called the Crop Monitor, and it is published in a monthly bulletin released by AMIS called the Market Monitor. So the main point here is that the countries that participate in the Crop Monitor again, talk to each other and they achieve consensus. They arrive on certain standards, they arrive at conditions that allow them to speak with a single voice as to, and to agree on what the crop conditions are in these various regions around the world for wheat, maize, soybeans, and rice. So the operational monthly bulletin has been produced since 2013. And as I mentioned, it's published in the AMIS Market Monitor. And this is what it looks like. It's, to date, it has there are over 40 organizations that contribute to this effort on a monthly basis. And this effort under GEOGLAM is really the first time that the international community has come together to produce operational crop assessments. And through this effort, we've been able to start to bridge the gap between Earth observation communities and economic communities. So GEOGLAM, and in particular, the operational monthly bulletin, was developed in close collaboration again with AMIS, so that we've been able to ensure that products that we are providing on the remote sensing side are understandable and meet the needs of our end users. And in this case, that would be principally policy and economists. So here is what the Crop Monitor looks like on a given month. This is for April 2019. And you can see that there is a legend here with various colors depicting exceptional conditions in blue, favorable in green, areas that are need watching in yellow. Poor areas are represented in orange. And then where we have a fairly dark gray, there is no data. Sorry, it's out of season, and brown represents that no data are available. So you can see that across most of the United States and in Mexico and Latin America, conditions were quite favorable to exceptional. There was one area that needed watching in the upper Midwest in the United States, but otherwise conditions were quite good as in for these for wheat production, and you can see what the other conditions are globally for the different crops. The Crop Monitor for Early Warning is also a product that is being produced. There are several global food security monitoring agencies that work together to produce this. So not only is a monthly crop condition monitor produced, but also a crop monitor for early warning. And so this is when conditions are looking bad and governments need to be informed of the situation so that they can take action accordingly. So a monthly publication is produced also that speaks to the early warning for 14 crops. So not just the basket of 4 that we talked about previously, but many additional crops are included in this early warning system. So here, again, is an example of what the early warning system looks like for a wider variety of crops. You can see down here in the lower right corner, in addition to maize, soybeans, and rice, we have sorghum, millet, barley, teff, and there are other crops as well that are not shown here because they're not necessarily grown in this region, but are across southern Africa. But again, this is showing what kinds of early warning information is available. Here is a slide that shows the various commodity groups who are involved in GEOGLAM. And then on the food security side, you can see those entities who are involved in producing the early warning. So FuseNet, I would assume many of you have heard of that. That comes from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and many others are located around the globe. Now, these products that I've been talking about are produced at a global level, but there are also products that can learn from this and produce, there are also, at the national level, we can also produce crop monitored and early warning announcements. National agencies have adopted this crop monitoring system under GEOGLAM to support national monitoring. There are operational systems ongoing at the national scale, and we have been working in particular with the Ministry of Agriculture in Tanzania and the Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda. So what's happened is that we've transitioned the GEOGLAM approach to producing crop monitors and early warning systems into their actual ministries, and now they are using these for their own bulletins on food security. And here are just a few examples of those products. So the GEOGLAM process has proved to be helpful not only at the global and regional scale, but also at the national scale. So there again, the main point that I'm trying to drive across is that GEO, and in particular following this illustration of GEOGLAM, provides a framework for countries to find consensus. Again, each country keeps its own, each government keeps its own priorities and objectives in mind, but nonetheless, through this global partnership that can happen through GEO or regional partnership, a consensus building effort is possible to come to an understanding on pronouncements on food security. Now, any good monitoring program, of course, rests upon a considerable amount of research and development. And in the GEOGLAM example, we have an entity called JCAM, the Joint Experiments for Crop Assessments and Monitoring, that stands as the kind of the research arm of GEOGLAM. JCAM is involved in providing the research foundation that's necessary, bringing together science and technology, especially in field sampling and ground truthing. Here you see in this example that people are out doing field work to provide the ground truth necessary for satellite retrievals. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that satellite, we talk about precipitation, we talk about temperature, we talk about a number of things coming from satellite imagery. In actual fact, all that satellites measure are radiation, and they measure radiation in various bands of the electromagnetic spectrum. From those radiation measurements, we can back out a whole host of things, of information, but we always need to validate those assessments with what's actually happening on the ground. And so JCAM provides the kind of the milieu in which this can take place, where technology and science come together to improve the products that are derived from satellite retrievals. So JCAM, again, the Joint Experiment for Crop Assessment and Monitoring sites are located around the world. Currently, there are about 30 or so sites. You can see here in green the ongoing sites. There are some new sites that have been added across Southeast Asia. There are a few that have gone inactive, a few that have even closed, but nonetheless, the important point is that we have a global network of these research sites. They're voluntary, and they provide essential information across a variety of crop conditions. Here you can see what the kind of information that is available from the jcam.org site. If you are operating a JCAM site, you get information about how to take measurements, what kinds of measurements are needed. You have galleries of information, and then you have the regions into which the participation happens, and also ways in which you can report your information. The JCAM network has been very successful at attracting funding for intercomparison experiments for both optical and radar data, and this has also produced a lot of peer-reviewed publications. So it's important, again, the point here is that it's important to have some research and development function within your food security monitoring, something on which to base your assessments, whether they be from satellite retrievals or modeling or what have you. Now, the last part of my presentation here is going to focus on impact stories. You know, after all, this is the whole reason that we are interested in Earth observations, to support policy, to support programs, and ultimately to support society. And again, in this particular case with GEOGLAM, to support food security. Food, of course, is one of the greatest challenges of this century. The Food and Agriculture Organization has anticipated that food production will be need to be an increase of up to 70% of food production by 2050 to meet the needs of a growing population. Agricultural land at the same time is degrading, and this, of course, is happening against a context of climate change. So addressing the need for food security is going to require the development of sound policies and programs and well-functioning commodity markets, along with the ability to quickly respond to emerging food production challenges. And then the appropriate mitigation and adaptation measures that will flow from this information will require timely and relevant, accurate information on the state and changes of global crop production. So Earth observations can help meet this need. And here we have an example that happened with Argentina. Argentina in early 2018 suffered one of its worst droughts in history. And the Ministry of Agro-Industry and the Argentine National Institute of Agricultural Technology, INTA, relied on the use of Earth observation satellites to inform their agricultural relief programs. So Argentina Minagro needed objective scientific evidence of drought impacts in order to enact their policy, and GEOGLAM was able to provide just that. They were able to provide precisely determined impact areas due to spatial information. And so thanks to Earth observation-based crop monitoring analysis, the government was able to declare an agricultural emergency with great spatial precision, triggering financial safety net programs to support Argentine farmers. In Uganda, a similar story happened in 2016. 2017, GEOGLAM worked with Uganda to develop an early warning crop monitor within the Prime Minister's office, which is now part of their disaster warning system. So Martin Orr, who is one of the commissioners at the Prime Minister's office, gave us a quote in that in the past we were always reacted to crop failure, spending billions of shillings to provide food aid in the region. And 2017 was the first time that we acted proactively because we had clear evidence from satellite data very early in the season. In terms of actual forecasts, so far we've been talking about just monitoring what's happening. But obviously, if we are able to forecast crop yields, that is of great interest as well. So on the Canada was one of the first nations to replace its production surveys with modeled results based on Earth observations. And why did they do this? It was done because traditional survey-based yields rely heavily on questionnaires, and that's a considerable, places a considerable burden on farmers. It's also, whenever humans are involved in taking observations, especially in situ observations, there can be biases. And also there was the need for an ever shorter lead time to produce the information. So the important point here is that research has demonstrated that Earth observation-based estimates of yield can be as reliable or even more reliable than the crop surveys that were up to this point being performed. And so you can see here an example of what the Canadian Crop Yield Forecaster is showing for canola. And this was in May 1st to August 31st of 2018. And again, the important point here is that with modeling, you are and modeling being constrained by Earth observations and fed Earth observation data can be quite useful in providing a yield estimate for the future, in the near future, seasonal forecast. The United Nations is also interested in Earth observations, and this is an example of how the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is using monitoring information in their food security alert system. And here you can see a response for food security across Southern Africa. So the last part of my presentation here is going to focus on policy and how Earth observations can support policy again, in particular, drawing from the GEOGLAM example, focusing mainly on food security. Since GEOGLAM started back in 2011, the Sustainable Development Goals as part of the UN Agenda for 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has come along. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. They are a series of goals that have targets, and under those targets there are indicators, and each of those indicators to a certain extent are measurable with Earth observations, or I should say Earth observations can inform those indicators so that countries are able to report with more accuracy under the SDG agreements. GEOGLAM itself, the community has identified that it contributes, as you might expect, quite heavily to SDG number 2, which stands for zero hunger. But also GEOGLAM contributes to SDG number 1, no poverty, number 3, good health and well-being, number 6, clean water and sanitation, number 12, responsible consumption and production, number 13, climate action, and number 15, life on land. So this is, again, just to say that using Earth observations is important for a number of issues. And again, the more you can show that you're supporting policy with Earth observations and the information that you're producing, then that gives you an even greater impetus and gravitas in the activities that you're doing. Here is just a map that shows how GEOGLAM is contributing to aspects of the SDGs. And another issue that I wanted to just touch on here are the concept of essential variables. You probably have heard of GEOSS, the Global Climate Observing System, and the essential climate variables that they came up with, the ECVs, a number of years ago. GEOSS came up with the essential climate variables, first of all, to support the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and UNFCCC had a number of variables that they needed to know about. So GEOSS set about trying to figure out what is measurable, what is feasible, what is cost effective, and at the intersection of those assessments, the essential climate variables were born. So the concept of essential climate variables is that they tell us, they serve as a minimum set of variables that are required to characterize both the state of a system and changes in that system. And in the context of GEOGLAM, essential agricultural variables have been produced, and these, again, represent the minimum set of variables that the agricultural community needs to understand the state of agriculture and change in agricultural systems in order to meet their mandate. And as such, the essential agricultural variables serve as the building blocks for the information that they produce. In other words, these tend to be the drivers for the information that they produce. And from a practical standpoint, the concept of essential variables is it's a useful communication device because it allows complicated information to be communicated to policymakers who need to know about it. So it allows a reduction in complexity when faced with multiple needs. It helps to focus activities. It helps to find priorities and to communicate those outputs in a way that supports coordination with other domains. So essential variables are also of interest to many in the GEO community, including CEOSS, the space arm of GEO, if you will. CEOSS stands for the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites. So it is, again, a partnership of space agencies globally who work together to coordinate their activities. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that in SEON's roadmap for Arctic GEOSS, there are considerable references to the development of essential Arctic variables. And so I think that this is something that would prove to be quite beneficial in the establishment of an Arctic GEOSS, because again, it helps to focus your priorities, it helps to communicate the essential needs of the Arctic system and to identify changes in the state of the Arctic. So to conclude here, let's recall what SEON's strategy is for an Arctic GEOSS. They're working on creating a roadmap for a well-integrated Arctic observing system. They're working to promote free and ethically open access to all Arctic observational data, and they're looking to ensure the sustainability of Arctic observing. So the important points that I've been trying to illustrate here with the GEOGLAM example is that it's critical to establish a strong working relationship with all organizations working in the Arctic. And if you're looking at food security, obviously you'd want to be in touch with food security organizations and work to find a way to build consensus, to speak with one voice, and to be considered the source for authoritative information. And the way that you do that is through supporting transparency and building trust amongst all the partners. So this would involve international partners, indigenous communities, regional partners, and so forth. You also need a science-based component that can provide the information needed on the conditions that would support market stability and provide early warning for food security. So again, I know that there are a number of research institutes that are involved in Arctic issues. And so the more that you can tie together a science or research and development base for your production and monitoring, the better off you're going to be. And then once you have developed applications involving Earth observations, you should be looking at ways that you can communicate and transfer that knowledge at the national, regional, and international levels. And again, all of this is underpinned by an Arctic Research Network. And then finally, again, if you can get international recognition, if at the upcoming Arctic Science Ministerial in their declaration, there can be a reference to Arctic GEOSS, or there can be some kind of reference to Earth observations as a means of providing food security or whatever other issues is of concern to the Arctic community, then that will enable you to gain gravitas and be looked at as the trusted source of information. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that you found it interesting and that there are some lessons that can be drawn from the example of GEOGLAM in terms of finding a policy mandate, in terms of looking at the kinds of products that you would want to deliver. Those products would hopefully speak to the policy mandate, as well as to speaking to the variety of essential Arctic variables that you might be identifying. And then lastly, you want to be involving all communities, finding a consensus and building on a solid foundation of research and development. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm sure you can find my contact information in the among the information that's available for this Arctic Observing Summit. Thank you very much.